this courtroom. Let me come to the poem, if I may, please, because the word in the translation, which is a bit of Latin doggerel, the author not being identified at the end of this passage of the continuation of the Croyland Chronicle, reads, Richard III was not content therewith, namely Edward's fortune, carefully garnered during his years on the throne, but must destroy his brother's progeny. And as you have indicated, your understanding of that is bringing the ruin of. Because the Latin word which is used is opprimerit. And the passage in fact reads, if everybody will forgive my mispronunciation, again, Nisi fratris opprimerit proles. Now the verb opprimer can be used in the sense of putting down the cause of, or reducing to impotence or inactivity. Because what is being conveyed here is that Richard destroyed their inheritance. The children, the princes' inheritance. He destroyed their political, he destroyed their royal personality by his actions. It does not mean, or does at any rate not necessarily mean, that he murdered them.
Yes, that's a case that's been written in a very worthwhile book recently.
What do you think is the case?
What do I think is the case? I think it depends. This word, I think, has several different possible meanings, and I think it's going to remain a matter of some dispute as to exactly what the author meant.
It's genuinely ambiguous.
It's genuinely ambiguous word, yes.
Then two things only, in relation to Croyland and in relation to Mancini. One of our troubles is that all the chroniclers are Southerners, or, like Mancini, are reporting the Southern cause. There is not a single Northern chronicler. No. One of the things that marks the whole of this period is the fear of the South, of the barbarians or aliens from the North, and the distrust of those from the North for those of the South. One of the things that one finds is the substantial prejudice running through Croyland, I respectfully suggest, of the Southerner about the Northerner. Can I read one passage to you? Lord, it's at page 509. If it's not included in the bundle which you have, during the adjournment I will ensure that you have it.
Thank you.
Referring to the period after Henry VII has ascended the throne, while visiting York...
What page is that?
509. Henry VII was visiting York, and there was an uprising while he was there. And the chronicler reports it in this way: although by these means peace was graciously restored, still the rage of some of the malignants was not averted. But immediately after Easter, a sedition was set on foot by these ingrates in the north, whence every evil takes its rise.
Yes.
Splendid stuff, isn't it?
Isn't it? And this even although the king was staying in those parts. I mean, the impertinent northerners, when the king is there, daring to rise.
Yes.
And that's a fair extract, because I can only use one.
That's very fair.
The other I'd like to simply ask you about, if I may, please, in relation to Mancini. As you've indicated, he obtained his information from a number of different sources, but clearly the Latin, Genoese merchants and so on, would be a fruitful one for him, particularly since he didn't speak English.
Not necessarily a lot of English. We don't know how much.
Little English. Never went out of London. No. Clearly was closer to the court of Edward IV. No contact with that of Richard III. Not even a physical description of Richard III. It's running throughout. Can I quote to you what another Italian said of the period, facing much the same sort of difficulties that Mancini did? I wish the country and the people were plunged deep in the sea because of their lack of stability, for I feel like one going to the torture when I write about them. No one ever hears twice alike about English affairs. It's almost an up-to-date report, I suppose.
This was another Italian.
That's another Italian.
Yes.
Another Italian spy.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Pollard. Dr. Starkey, please.
Thank you.
Lord, this is my last witness.
Thank you.
Dr. Starkey, is your Christian name David?
It is indeed, and Robert too.
And what are your qualifications?
I am a doctor of philosophy and history, an expert in the Tudor court, with an interest in the later 15th century.
You've been listening, I suppose, to the evidence to date. Did you hear what Dr. Pollard said about the pre-contract?
Yes, I agreed with everything that he said. It is clearly a concatenation of lies, rumour and absurdity, but we can go very much further. It is not merely a concatenation of absurdity, it is a red herring.
Why?
And was known to be because succession wipes out illegitimacy as every other obstacle to the throne. Edward, of course, had succeeded. He was king, absolutely.
On what basis?
By proclamation, by acceptance, by oaths of allegiance led by Richard himself, and by the execution of acts of state and the royal signature appended thereto.
So what you're saying, then, quite simply, is that the pre-contract doesn't arise because Edward V had acceded, and therefore, in law...
In the Sergeant Plowden, sir, if you wish exact citation in the 16th century, he describes accession as being like a very diamond, yea, the philosopher's stone, which wipeth out all blot. And we have indeed not merely the theory, the practice. Queen Elizabeth, of blessed memory, was bastardized in 1536. She nevertheless ascended the throne unchallenged in 1588 and never thought to wipe out that bastardy because the very act of her accession did it for her.
Yes, thank you. Well, now...
1558, the correction is most welcome, sir.
I hope to continue in the same vein, sir.
A little more Irish logic would help us, Mr. Dillon.
By whom was the proclamation to which you attach, no doubt rightly, such great importance
By the council,
made?
sir. By the council acting in its absolute capacity so to do. By the mayor of London. By Richard himself in the north and by every other authority in the country.
Thank you.
Again, do you agree with Dr. Pollard that Mancini and Croyland are the most reliable, contemporaneous chroniclers?
Absolutely so. They have perfect access to information and complement
I only
each
want
other.
to ask you one matter arising out of what they said, and that was the murder of Hastings, as referred to by Mancini, as we've heard. What interpretation do you place upon the reaction to the murder of Hastings?
It was the reaction that was intended to an act of unprecedented political terror. There is nothing in all the annals of the 15th century which parallels the conduct of Richard of York. A man is dragged actually from the cabinet table to instant execution. There is simply nothing like it. There are such executions after battle, as it were by the form of trial before the constable, but nothing like that. And it achieved the effect that was desired. Until that moment, everybody apart from Richard and Buckingham had tried to behave well. They had tried to follow the ordinary forms of law and decency. At that moment, the political nation is stampeded as Richard and Buckingham intended.
Well, now, may I come to what I really want to ask you about, Dr. Starkey, and that's the later chroniclers, Moore and Virgil.
I wouldn't call them chroniclers, sir, if I may correct you.
Please.
I would call them historians. This is the beginning of history, and it is something different.
Let's deal with Moore first. I think he wrote a history of Richard III in about 1513, so we're talking about 30 years after the event.
Yes, perhaps even finishing it as late as 50, or rather breaking off as late as 1521.
Did he ever finish
He
it?
never finished.
He never finished. It was broken off in 1521.
Yes. Tell us a little about Moore, quite shortly, please.
Moore is a lawyer, an intellectual, a politician, a figure of international reputation, friend of Erasmus, eventually canonized, Henry's Lord Chancellor, and the King's good servant, but God's first, in his own apt words.
Now, he tells the story of which I outlined in my opening.